The end of the war in Ukraine is nowhere in sight, because Vladimir Putin continues to order his forces to throw their bodies against Ukraine's defenses. Thanks to their president, thousands of Russian soldiers die every month. Yet Putin seems oblivious to the fact that he is dragging his country deeper into a war that has already been lost. Russia has failed to achieve its original goals, and because of Putin, the country has suffered a strategic defeat with major consequences both inside and outside Ukraine. A NATO admiral has explained why Putin has already lost the war in Ukraine. That admiral is Giuseppe Cavo Dragone, who has served as chairman of the NATO Military Committee since January 2025. Speaking to the BBC on November 2, Dragone said, "From an operational point of view, the war between Russia and Ukraine is so bogged down that it's almost time to sit down and talk, because this is just a loss of life. Putin's strategy of attrition, wearing Ukraine down over time and capturing the whole country, has backfired. Instead, Russia has sunk into the very quagmire it created." The numbers show that Dragone is right. In terms of lost soldiers and equipment, Russia is bleeding itself dry to sustain what Putin still calls his special military operation. According to Ukraine's Ministry of Finance, between the start of the invasion and November 4th, more than 1.14 million, 1,140,000 Russian soldiers have been killed, wounded, or captured. On the equipment front, Russia has fared no better. Over 11,300 tanks have been destroyed, damaged, or otherwise rendered unusable. The same applies to some 34,250 armored vehicles and more than 66,500 cars and systems. In the air domain, the situation is equally dire. Around 1,200 Russian anti-aircraft systems have been destroyed, along with 428 aircraft and 346 helicopters. Russia has
Savaşın
also lost
ortasında
an
silahını
astonishing
bıraktı, eline kemanını aldı. Arkadaşlarına
77,860
moral vermek
drones
için
to
Ukrayna
Ukraine's
Milli Marşı'nı
defenses.
çaldı.
This is not just a war that has dragged Russia into a military quagmire. It's one that is costing the country
Görüntüler
vast sums
Ukraynalı
of money.
askerlerin koğuşundan. Askerlerin
When it
kimi
comes to
bankların, kimi
economics,
ranzaların
Russia's
üzerinde
predicament
oturuyordu.
is just
Ukrayna
as
Milli
severe.
Marşı çaldığının farkına
In
vardılar.
February
Hemen ayağa kalktılar.
2025,
Odayı
Russia
kemanın sesi
Matters
doldurdu.
highlighted the
Kimi askerler
staggering
o anları
cost of
cep
what has
telefonu
become a
kameralarıyla
three-year
kayda
war
aldı.
that Putin never anticipated. Sanctions have crippled the Russian economy, freezing roughly $340 billion in reserves and causing $78.5 billion in losses to Russia's energy sector. More than 460 companies have left Russia, striking another economic blow. After the artificial, war-driven surge in economic activity, Russia's growth is now slowing sharply. The World Economic Outlook projects growth to fall to 1.4% in 2025 and 1.2% in 2026. The Moscow Times reported on October 30th that the Russian economy grew only 1% in the first 9 months of 2025, 4 times slower than during the same period in 2024. All of this stems from how deeply Russia has become mired in Ukraine. This special military operation was never meant to become a multi-year war. For Putin, it was supposed to be quick and easy. In 2014, The Guardian reported that Putin had once claimed Russia could conquer all of Ukraine in just 2 weeks. More than a decade later, those 2 weeks have stretched into nearly 4 years, and counting. As Dragone said, Russia will eventually have to negotiate. The only obstacle is Putin himself. His inability to admit the true cost of his strategic mistakes in Ukraine means he will resist talks for as long as he can. Meanwhile, Russia's losses are not just on the battlefield. Putin's invasion has produced the opposite of what he intended internationally, a stronger NATO. Both Sweden and Finland joined NATO in direct response to Russia's actions in Ukraine, closing what planners once called a white space in the Baltic Sea region. NATO is now more unified, better funded, and militarily reinforced. In June 2025, all NATO members agreed to raise defense spending to 5% of GDP by 2035. A level of commitment unimaginable before the war. Putin wanted to weaken NATO. Instead, he has revitalized it. The alliance is deploying drone defenses along its eastern flank by 2026, countering Russia's own UAV threat. Sweden brings over a century of submarine warfare experience, strengthening NATO's hold over the Baltic. Once a neutral buffer zone, now an area firmly under alliance surveillance. Even if Putin believes that victory in Ukraine will reverse his problems, he is mistaken. According to Dragon, even a Russian victory in Ukraine will not mean Putin controls the country. They will not be able to install a friendly or puppet government, as in Belarus. Putin will not succeed. Polls in Ukraine back this up. Over 3/4, around 75%, of Ukrainians said they would reject any peace deal that ceded territory to Russia or limited NATO membership. In other words, even if Russia were to occupy all of Ukraine, it would face endless resistance, sabotage, and insurgency. No Russian victory would translate into stability. And with an economy in decline, hundreds of thousands of casualties, and a revitalized NATO, even success on the battlefield would leave Russia weaker for decades to come. Putin's nuclear saber-rattling has also failed to intimidate the West. While Russia showcases new weapons like the Poseidon underwater drone and the Burevestnik nuclear-powered cruise missile, Dragon points out that NATO too is a nuclear alliance. Between the United States, France, and the United Kingdom, NATO collectively controls more than 5,500 nuclear weapons, on par with Russia, and can deliver them by land, sea, or air. Putin's threats, once capable of instilling fear, now only reinforce NATO's resolve. Ultimately, this is why Russia has already lost the war in Ukraine, whether Putin realizes it or not. Even if Russia captures more land, its progress is painfully slow. At the current rate, Reuters reported in October 2025 that Russia would capture only 1% of Ukraine's territory between January and December 2025, adding to the 19% it already occupies. At that pace, it would take nearly a century, 100 years, to conquer Ukraine entirely. By then, Russia's economy would be exhausted, its military hollowed out, and its global influence diminished. NATO would be stronger than ever, and even a victorious Russia would face an ungovernable Ukraine, fiercely opposed to Russian control. So yes, Putin may still dream of victory, but every path forward leaves Russia weaker, poorer, and more isolated. Even if he wins, he loses.